Hi, Dr. Lyle.
Dr. Lyon, how are you doing? How are things going?
Well, things are going well here, Dr. Lyle. How are things going for you?
All is well. I actually saw the first signs of spring, so I know that you've got snow, so that's the difference between California and Minnesota.
Yep, yep. Well, it's feeling like spring more here too, as some of
Mhm.
the snow melts and the days get longer. That's one of the
Yeah,
biggest signs is that the daylight feels good when it starts getting longer about this time of year.
I love that. Absolutely, you bet.
Well, what we're up to today is Eat, Win, Hungry 10. We are now in double digits. It's hard to believe that. There's a lot to say about a weight loss journey and, in a broader way, a health journey. It's really important for me to say that part of the audience that watches this definitely is watching it because of losing weight and what we talk about in terms of weight loss. But one of the assumptions that I've had to break down in my own journey is that people can understand the pull of the pleasure trap without struggling with weight. And that has been an insight that I've had since going public with my journey. And I think your work with the pleasure trap has also helped me understand that. So let's just talk briefly about that and who you are and what you bring to this conversation. And then we can go from there.
Sure. The pleasure trap was a phrase that was invented by my colleague Dr. Alan Goldhammer when he was trying to come up with a title for our book. And the book was going to be about how we we knew True North Health Center in California has been since the early 1980s. It's been a place where people would go to basically eat super healthy food, and sometimes they would do a water fast or a juice fast or broth. But a big part of the process there was essentially resensitizing their palate. And so it was our theory that the taste nerves, yeah, are just like any other nerves, and that is that they can effectively become less sensitive if you overwhelm them with stimuli. So the same thing with your eyes. If we put you in the darkness, what's going to happen is you're going to get far more sensitive to light. And so if you are in broad daylight, then you are essentially less sensitive. And what's happening with the food is that the modern food supply is super intense. And so what has happened is that the taste nerves have become less sensitive. And so that actually sets up what we call the pleasure trap. And that is that the foods that are in the scientific literature as a name for them, they call them hyperpalatable. We call them supernormal stimuli because we consider hyperpalatable food a subset of supernormal stimuli, including cocaine, caffeine, alcohol, you know, opiates. In other words, any supernormal stimuli is simply when stimulus has been changed out of its natural state and now put into a state that is more intense to hit the pleasure centers of the brain. And so that's what, gambling does that. It turns out that probably the best little gambling tool in the world is a slot machine. Slot machines just super effective at dinging the little dopamine circuitry. And so the, the modern food supply is a little bit like a slot machine. In other words, it's very enticing. And what happens is that the people by winding up with their diet being essentially dominated by these things, they wind up with palates that are not very sensitive. And so when you try to go to natural food that's less intense, it's frustrating because it's not as enjoyable. And so that is the trap because you were designed by nature to seek out what is most enjoyable and not designed to seek out things that are less enjoyable. And so that sets up a pattern that can be hard to break out of, and that's what's called the pleasure trap.
Yeah. And that pleasure trap certainly is
Yes.
something that has ruled my life. I've talked about my story before, but just in case we have a
Yeah.
new viewer, I used to weigh about twice what I weigh today, and losing half my weight has been something that I wanted to do for years. Weight loss has been something I've wanted to do and known I needed to do. The earliest I can track it to is late elementary school,
Hmm.
and being really thoughtful about understanding how deeply the pleasure trap has impacted me, has really helped me be able to take on this journey. And in our last episode, we talked a little bit about how the learning continues on this journey.
Hmm.
And there's things I'm learning today, 5 years in, to the decision to walk away as much as I could from the pleasure trap. Now, to be honest, I still struggle at times with that. And I will speak up wholeheartedly that that struggle is a natural part of the process.
Yeah.
And it does come from living, as you call it, in a pathological environment with, I call them super normal foods or ultra processed foods. I don't have the scientific distinction that you have, but knowing about the ultra processed foods has been important in my own journey. And I'd say that uprooting the myth of moderation has been at the center of that as well. Now, when we talk about uprooting things, there's the physical journey that you talked about with the process of removing the foods and then realizing that your taste buds had been desensitized to that process. There's a whole emotional journey that goes with this as well. And so I wanted to revisit that because our last episode we talked about what does it take to lose a pound of fat. And
Yes.
we looked at that scientifically. We looked
Hmm.
at it motivationally. We looked at it emotionally, and we looked at it socially. And I really felt like when I watched our repeat of that episode that I hadn't done justice to the complexity of the emotional journey. And on my notes, I had at least like 35 different ways to describe the journey, and they didn't come out in the episode. And so I wanted to revisit those emotional pieces to bring some clarity to those, because I think a lot of times the emotion of the journey is sometimes misunderstood as the whole journey in terms of emotional eating. And so, I've been able to feel the difference between emotional eating and the emotions of the journey. Some of that, the best way that I can describe it is that I get tired of overriding my instinct toward those rich foods.
Hmm.
And so it feels like a giving into emotion. With that, I'm going to go into my process coming out of the last episode. So like I said, I had about 35 different emotions, and then I decided to do some more with them to see if I could understand them and frame them a little bit differently as we came into this episode.
Hmm.
So what I did was I took those 35 emotions and I started a list, and it was more purposeful than the first time that I did it. And I just listed everything that I had felt, all the emotions I had felt that I could think of around my weight. I then counted them. I had 97. And so
Yes.
I thought, okay, I can do three more because there are so many nuances to this. So I did, because 100 is a nice round number to work with. And then what I did was I started categorizing them into different um, areas. And that was really helpful for me. And we'll share this slide so that our viewers can see it. But in the center of it, I decided that Sisyphus belonged. And if you know anything about Sisyphus, Sisyphus was condemned to roll that boulder up the hill all the time, and then it would fall down. And that was Sisyphus's condemnation, and to spend a lifetime doing that as a punishment. And so in many ways, for me, this journey has felt like Sisyphus. I failed at losing the weight so many times. I had some successes, but I had way more failures. The number on my scale kept going up over time. I became afraid of the number of 300. I don't know if I hit that number, but that idea of Sisyphus becomes really important. And is this something you've seen in your work with others as well?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I would say the frustration that people have felt having made many attempts and then failed so many times, and feeling demoralized, as they now call me on attempt number 27, and or actually there's more than that, because people will start this thing at Monday morning at 9 a.m. and then they'll bail out by 4 in the afternoon. So they will try more than 27 times. They'll make 27 major attempts over 20 years to really try hard, where they might go a week or two or three or four or six or even 12. In other words, there will be some huge efforts about pushing that rock up the hill, and then they will fail. And so very often I'm getting phone calls from people who want help and want encouragement, but are bitter and angry and aren't think or don't think that I can give it to them. And so they're already frustrated with me, but I'm not going to say anything that's going to be useful, because they failed so many times. They're so sure that they've thought of everything. And
Mhm.
so, and inevitably they haven't. You know what I mean? There's a reason why it is. There are reasons why we're failing, and our job is to identify those at a essentially a micro enough level that it gives us something that we can change in the right direction to try to start to alter the balance. But yes, I have had that conversation 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the emotions continue. That's one of the things that I thought for most of my life, one of the misconceptions that I had was that once I figured out what to do, that like the struggle would be gone. And the
Mhm.
struggle comes and goes. It is far easier now than it was 5 years ago when I was implementing lifestyle change. But this is a recurrent process. And so some of the same things around the pleasure trap and the pull of those rich foods continue to get me here and there.
Mhm.
The same is true for these emotions that I've categorized into really a sweeping look. When it comes down to it, it's a sweeping look at how deeply weight has impacted my daily experiences in my life. There's emotional pain that comes with it. There's physical pain that comes with it. Those two are very, very connected. The more physical pain I felt, the closer I was to that 300 pounds. Or if I was at that 300 pounds, it was painful. My feet hurt, my body hurt. It was hard to move. It was hard to get up. It was hard to even think about getting to the grocery store, let alone preparing healthy foods. I was in a pattern of work, which I did really enjoy, and being home. But, my life was shrinking the more I weighed. And that was something that caused a great deal of emotional pain and suffering for me. At various periods, I did feel hopelessness and lost opportunities. I know you talk a lot about cost benefit analysis, and I think ultimately lost opportunities was part of my cost benefit analysis too, is seeing those happen over and over again, especially the higher my weight got and the more that I wanted to reverse that for the time period that I had left in my life. Um,
Mhm.
at various times, I felt avoidance and defensiveness and frustration. And I hear in what you said about, well, how people approached you and being angry and that sort of thing. I've talked about being fed up, but
Mhm.
that there's a whole range of being defeated and defensive, and then not even seeing things clearly in that anger and frustration. There's a whole host of feelings that go with that. And then once in a while, I found determination and motivation and some
Yes.
really positive things within motivation and determination. And the hard part was stringing it together long enough to get it to work and then to recover after failure instead of shutting down. And those are the struggles that come with lifestyle change, which is another area that there's a whole lot of different things that I could name fall into the emotions of struggling with this and feeling defeated by it, struggling with those personal feelings of failure and what that means. For me, naming failure was important because I felt it, whether I named it or not. And once I named it, it took away some power for me. And then a couple other categories, just broadly speaking, weight is very closely associated with my sense of personal self, my sense of identity of who I am in this world. There's been shifting terrains of visibility and invisibility that are very complex to navigate as well when you are large, and then even in the changing of the sizes, which I felt very dramatically when I lost weight over COVID. And I felt it in ways I hadn't when I lost weight more gradually. And then there's that sense of belonging and how you fit in to society that weight is a part of as well. And finally, there's just this whole emotional roller coaster that goes with it, where, if someone says to me, how people should talk to me about weight, well, it depends where I'm at on that roller coaster. There's like no winning that. So it's really about, I've decided it's about me to handle questions with grace and to navigate it from where I'm at right there and not expect people to have the right thing to say all the time and not to let them go when they don't say the right thing. And because, I've found that a lot of that is temporary. And if I handle that differently, I can navigate life better by understanding that people don't know how to talk to me about weight because my experiences around weight are so complex. And then there's social judgment and stigma that are part of that as well. And so I wanted to really cover these because when I think about this big umbrella, like this is a sweeping look at day-to-day life and the emotions that we have. I think about weight every day. I've thought about weight every day, far, with far greater pain when I wasn't at a healthy weight. But I can remember what I weighed at, approximately what I weighed at every event in my life. Like I can tell you whether I was feeling good about my trajectory or bad about my trajectory. I can tell you what range I was in and what size I was in. These, when we talk about the meaning of a pound, these are significant associations with numbers. And
Yeah.
so, as a psychologist, I'd like to just have you tap into something that I've said there that might be helpful for people who are negotiating this complex emotional web that goes with weight.
I sort of rarely get the opportunity to be talking down through like with one person who's made this journey. Um, so many different angles and so many different uh, nuances of this process. I'm really happy that we've had a chance to do this and to take many hours to do it because I think I've told you this before that we probably had this conversation early that it's not uncommon for people that if they lose some weight, then they want to tell their story. And I will tell them, yeah, we're not telling yours. Don't even think about telling your story for a while because just because you got there doesn't mean you're anywhere near at the finish line. You are, and so we probably spent a year of you just, maintaining and thinking and us talking about other things in your life, et cetera, just trying to uh, find, some real more solid ground.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, we got there. And so you're on very solid ground now. You're on an interesting solid ground. You're not on the solid ground of a thin person. You're on the solid ground of a person that knows damn well that if you get out of line, you got the genes to get you in deep trouble. And so it's a the but the angles and all the things that you talk about, it's actually incredible because we you talk about your identity and how important it is that your weight and even specific numbers, et cetera. Those are little markers that we use on a scale to try to measure, where our situation is and how out of control we are and what trajectories, which direction things are going. And people are there are people out there that are sort of not they're not built psychologically to be particularly embarrassed, and they're not built that psychologically to be particularly self-disciplined, and they're quote fat and happy. And God bless those people. I mean, it's they are who they are, and they're not that unhappy about it. And you'll meet those people, and you're going to be like, wow, that's some pretty high self-esteem for what where there's some pretty substantial social prices that are going with that, but you don't seem to be recognizing those prices. So you're almost blissfully ignorant of how expensive this is socially. You know what I mean? So those people exist, and I would never want to puncture their bubble. And if they're ever motivated to try to lose a few pounds, I try to put them in the right direction. But I don't want to go hunt them down and tell them how catastrophic it is when it's not catastrophic for them. But I have to tell you that the majority of people are absolutely hypersensitive. They are very aware of their bodies. They are very aware of, and being overweight is such a completely and utterly unnatural set of circumstances. I mean, the only time this happens is to women in pregnancy. I mean, that's the only time in nature where this takes place. And so only in modern times, i.e., since anybody figured out how to, I don't know, make sugar and butter, for the last 10,000 years, there have been some wealthy people that got fat. But the world didn't get fat until 1950, in westernized democracies. So that was the time when that started. And then by 1980s, it was a runaway epidemic. And so we would find this, we now live in this world that doesn't look like the world of my youth in 1965. You look around now and you walk by people that are 70 pounds overweight and they're normal. This is like quite normal. 50 pounds overweight is quite normal. And so it's normal. So I'm glad that they've got company so they don't necessarily feel like particular outliers. But the truth of the matter is they are keenly aware, most people, of a deep embarrassment, a tremendous frustration, and a sense of helplessness around this. And it runs so deep. I have many things to say in psychology. There's so many different angles, and there's so many people that have been responsible for pieces of insight in my field. And with things that we talk about here, the person that actually comes to mind to me the most is Albert Bandura, who is the great Stanford professor of social learning theory. And Bandura talked endlessly about what he called self-efficacy or perceived self-efficacy. And what that really means is he was a very exacting kind of a guy. He really tried to explain what he meant when there was easier language. The easy language was to call it self-confidence. And Bandura's like, no, 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 no. That's the feeling, but that is not, in fact, the psychological calculus that is causing the feeling. So if we want to understand self-confidence, we must understand the calculus that is underneath the self-confidence. The calculus that's underneath it is perceived self-efficacy or our perceived probability of success. That issue sits at the core of unbelievable amount of, as you talked about, your occasional rises in motivation and excitement, but mostly the devastating chronic feeling of being lost. Because if we looked inside your head, for most people, we would find a low perceived probability of success or low perceived self-efficacy that they're going to somehow be able to do what it would take to succeed. And that is and knowing that this is what people are sitting on and knowing that that's what's on the other side of the phone when people call. They've learned a lot, they know a lot, they think they must know it all, but their perceived probability of success is extremely low. And they're devastated, depressed, and this lurking awful feeling that this can't possibly be the identity that I have to live with. There's a thinner person that could be living and could have a very different relationship to my social environment and physical environment, but particularly social. And but they can't seem to figure out how to get there. And they've rolled that thing up the hill a bunch of times. And so this is the feelings of frustration, the very low self-confidence, the anger that it's not fair because they see, you know, their best friend or their sister or somebody else, eats bonbons with both hands and is only 15 pounds overweight. So it's completely unfair. And so, and and the feeling of the constant little tiny bits of social judgment that come our way because we're so sensitive to people's social feedback. This is an amazingly complex psychological, you know, uh, creation that we live in. And the frustrating thing for me is that it's all unnatural. It's all unnatural. This is no, all of the dilemmas, all the difficult choices, all the cognitive dissonance about how it is that I'm going to do that. If we put you back in your natural environment, you would actually have none of it.
Mhm.
That is an amazing realization. And so it's the same kind of realization if you think about someone struggling with a deep addiction and you realize that person, if we put them in their natural environment, they would not have that struggle. That struggle would literally be gone and it would never have would have been part of their life. Life would be difficult. Life's got struggles. We've got saber-toothed cats. We've got all kinds of problems. But we don't have the bizarre and unnatural, psychological dilemmas that people live with today. And yeah, this is, you lived with the most common haunting problem of our time,
Mhm.
and it is that's why in the pleasure trap it's mastering the hidden force that undermines health and happiness. It is a hidden force. It's our draw to the richest foods in the environment, which is an echo of our natural history. So that force, we think that we're being naughty, we think that we're being self-indulgent, we think that we're being undisciplined, but the truth is all you're really doing is you're following your instincts.
Mhm.
And the problem is if you do that, you're in trouble.
Mhm.
And so this sends up creates an endless fight that we're either successful or we're unsuccessful or maybe we're in the muddy middle. But the muddy middle is, hard to even keep. You know what I mean? So yeah, you've pretty well found yourself either on one end of it or the other end of it. And getting here and keeping here is, quite the journey and a never-ending vigilant process.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Vigilant is the key word there. It requires that constant vigilance. And that vigilance is the boulder up the hill.
Yeah.
It is. And sometimes when it's running downhill, it might be easy during those times, or easier. But I really take issue with some of the ideas that for me, it has not been easy. And to continue to be successful, it is easier than it was because you develop this strategies for success. I feel it from the inside out. I talk a lot about those causal chains, so that I can, when I start seeing the causal chain running toward getting caught in the pleasure trap again, I can intercept it and get back in that trajectory of success. But truly, I want to go back to something that you said about the the Sisyphus, the struggle of it, the being constant in the emotional journey. Echoing something that you said is that almost all of my words in that 100 word list were negative,
Yeah.
all of them in that
Right.
negative around
Yes.
what weight has meant in my life. And
Yes.
there are there are a few that are positive, like in turning things around, feeling a sense of elation, a sense of pride, a sense of control over
Mhm.
something that has run amok in my life. And but to have almost all the words associated negatively negatively with my struggle,
Yes.
it takes something to work through, especially since I do believe in body positivity and body acceptance and self-acceptance. And then, like to think that and I'm not a number on the scale, and I do believe that I'm not a number of the scale. And you talked about how the number on the scale doesn't, it's a measure, but it's not our self-identity. But then the fact that I can identify that number on my scale when I look at every life event. I can remember the numbers of that event. How accurately, there probably is, some nuance, but not large scale. I'm not getting that confused. When I graduated from college, I'm not missing that mark by 50 pounds. I guarantee that.
Yes. Oh.
So these numbers, you know, do they have that scientific meaning, but it's hard, even though it means what it means to lose a pound is something that is a scientific piece. And we can't really say emotionally what that means, but yet it has this whole host of meanings to people.
Mhm.
And so when I think about, again, going back to being in the doctor's office or talking to someone about weight, and someone says something and I may take offense because I'm in this emotional thing, it becomes a really complex thing to talk about. And I think for that reason, I had a lot of silence around weight in my
Yes.
and some of that is the stigma as well. So, um, speaking of stigma, I'd like to
Yeah.
shift a little bit
Yeah.
because I think as I've been public with my story, one of the things that I think comes back to me from other people is outreach on resources around disordered eating patterns and eating disorders and that sort of thing. There is an undercurrent, I think, sometimes because I've said that I struggle, that struggle equates the need for therapy. And I wanted to have you weigh in on that in terms of your standpoint with your experiences and your knowledge base.
Yes. There's a uh, hmm, it's a really great question. The therapy, I don't want to completely put things and make these categorical because there's a continuum here. But therapy typically means that the roots of the problem are uh, deep and unconscious, or have to do with early life relationships or big turning points, etc. And the truth of the matter is that that is largely misunderstanding the nature of human psychology. So, to me, there is therapy as it's currently imagined and sort of conceptualized is actually largely a mistake. So, therapy to me is nothing other than the hopefully correcting mistakes that a person has in their understanding of the world, uh, possibly about themselves or their relationship to the world, that actually then make them more accurate in their ability to analyze cost benefit and therefore have their motivation directed in things that are going to be more successful. So the two to paint a story of a picture, which is therapy typically would be, well, the reason your business is failing is because you really have incomplete issues with your father, that you always felt like you weren't enough, and then so somehow you've engineered your own defeat here at 44 years old because it's really all about, you haven't really gotten through the Oedipal phase. You're still trying to please your mother. And so this is why it is that you've actually engineered your own failure. Okay. Um, that notion doesn't make any sense to me, and bears no relationship to any observable scientific fact in biology. A different interpretation would be you've actually misanalyzed your market. You've been a little too, you've given a little too much rope to employees that weren't very good, and then they let you down. Or you actually hit a downturn in the economy and you weren't sure what to do and you bet wrong. And basically, the reason for your business failure is that that you made mistakes, and you made mistakes not because you're stupid or not because you are incompetent, but you made mistakes because you didn't have enough information. Had you had better information, you would have made better decisions. And had you made better decisions, we'd have better outcomes. And then you wouldn't have a failing business. So therefore, now what we need to do is find out where, how many moves do we have left and what can we do differently, or should we be doing anything differently it's possible that the entire business, Steve Jobs himself couldn't save it because it just could be that that's the situation, or it could be that all we really need is, somebody that knows how to do your advertising for a third the cost and twice as effective. Okay. So the notion is the therapy here is all about getting better information. So obviously we're talking about the most deeply personal things in people's lives. We're not talking about their accounting. So as a result of that, it makes sense for therapists to be sympathetic and gentle, et cetera, in their interpersonal manner. But they should still be directed completely at finding out where the people have misconceptions in their understanding about themselves and the world. And that is not how therapy is done. So when people start looking for doing therapy on eating disorders, they are not basically addressing the problem at the root. And the roots are the misconceptions. Many of them are deeply biological. So people are, what we did last time when we talked about what is a pound. I went on some other thing. I think it might have been Chef AJ. I can't remember where I was. And I said, I just got to do a rant on this very question about a pound or whatever it was. And I'm so happy. And everybody can go to Dr. Tania Lyon's because I finally got a bunch of things said that I've always wanted to say. And that is that one of the great underlying demotivating and miserable features of this space is people misunderstanding what a pound is and what it takes to lose it. And I can't tell you how many bright, competent, conscientious people will tell me, no, it's not working. And the answer is, why do they know? Because for 3 weeks they've done what I've said and they're no better off. It's like, yeah, that's because you might be losing an ounce a day right now and you can't see it because it's buried in the water variance. And so if those are people that are motivated enough to talk to me and they're motivated enough for 3 weeks to actually do the diet change very, very carefully, I know that that dietary change is going to lead them to the promised land, but their self-efficacy mechanisms as a human aren't designed by nature to continue to go along a direction and not get fed. If you have a theory about where the food is in nature and you miss for 21 days in a row, you and your whole tribe are all damn near dead. You can't afford to not have positive feedback for 21 days. And yet, this is precisely what it takes in order to get on top of this problem. You actually have to understand a pound that is, if people had the ability to see an ounce of fat loss at the end of a day, if we had a measurement device, we wouldn't have these problems. Okay? That literally 3 days in a row, we had a completely perfect scientific feedback system, which will be invented someday, probably not in my lifetime, but it should be. It literally is the promised land for weight loss because then we don't have to argue about what diet works. You can go ahead and gain 3 pounds tonight by eating a bunch of potatoes and drinking some iced tea. But the point is that tomorrow morning that scale is going to show you lost 2 ounces of fat yesterday, even though your weight's up 2 pounds. In other words, that is what is necessary, but we do not own that technology at this moment in time. And as a result, very bright, highly motivated, well-educated people aren't well-educated enough. And as a result, they don't understand some very important details. And through not understanding the details, their motivation can be completely undermined. Their perceived self-efficacy can be in trouble. The entire thing can go careening around. Now they start experimenting with different things and now they're lost. And then they're thinking, now we wind up in helpless situations, sometimes eating disorder situations. And it's like, well, what do we need? Therapy. It's like, no, what we need is a therapy that is directed at you having a very, very important, detailed understanding of your own biology. That's actually, i.e., the only therapy that is in the world that's of any use is a therapy that is about improving the person's understanding of the truth, with rare exceptions. Okay. There are times as a therapist, counselor, mother, teacher, there are rare times when we would give people false positive feedback because it would be incredibly humane to do so. Okay.
Mhm.
But those are really, really rare events. So, but 99.9% of the time, the only therapy that should ever be there is kind investigation of the truth. Yeah.
I love that kind investigation of the truth. And I think that really gets at, I think even uh, the idea that people think something's wrong with me if I say that I struggle to maintain these lifestyle changes, it would be dishonest to say that I don't struggle from time to time. And there's nothing wrong with that struggle. There's nothing wrong with needing support in that struggle. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with acknowledging it. And it's just, I think, another way that this problem is simplified to be a problem of brokenness and being fixed. And
Yes.
and that if you struggle, you're still broken. And that's again another nuance and angle of this piece that the deeper you get into it. And I have had some people say, I thought it was they've told me this. I've thought it was a motivational tagline. I was not broken and I was not and I am not fixed. And then I've worked with several people who have said, no, there's a lot to that the deeper they get into it. And yes, there is. And this is one that I have discovered, an angle that I've discovered by speaking publicly that I wouldn't have known existed. And yet the best thing that helps is a kind investigation of the truth.
Yes.
So,
I want to pause for just 1 second. Your you came up with that phrase. I can't remember. It's probably a year ago when we were talking, and you were insisting on this phrase of "I wasn't broken and I'm not fixed." That turns out to have been a super important theme that it's been in my head forever, but was never synthesized down into such a succinct concept. And I have to tell you that the that is I am grateful that you actually, made a point to repeat that over and over again. And so that is now become far more of a clinical mantra that I when I hear somebody, like, the first thing I'm thinking is try to tell them there's nothing wrong with you.
mhm,
Your situation has pathological environmental elements in it. Okay. But and the it's actually it can be frustrating because people can be highly motivated. Now we're circling back around to the therapy issue. I'm thinking of a person that I've been working with over the last year or so, where there's a relationship that's not working well, and one party wants to fix themselves so the relationship will work. Okay. The problem is that there's nothing wrong with them. The relationship is inherently conflicted. Person on the other side is not going to change. In other words, there's no way to get around the fact that these conflicts exist. And yet the sort of the softer of the two humans wants to change themselves to find somehow in themselves the solution. And my feedback is, uh-uh, there's nowhere to find it there, because the truth of the matter is that's not where the problem is. There is absolutely 100% nothing wrong with you. And so that leaves us in a dilemma, in the sense that our situation, there may be no fix for the situation because it's inherent conflict. In the same way that, yeah, and I think, also, just to reiterate things you and I have talked about, the notion of this transplants on obviously perfectly to everything, but specifically most dramatically to drug addiction. So the people in drug addiction often are basically taught, we have to go back into your history, find out the holes in your soul, make right on everything, and then we fix you, and then this is going to be derivative, is the problem being fixed. And it's like, no, you're actually looking for the problem in the wrong place.
mhm,
The problem is it never happened on the Kalahari. It is not part of human nature to have this problem. We have super normal, unnatural, you know, person environment relationships where the environment is effectively pathological. And then once you're caught in the trap, there's a tumultuous psychological, physical, financial, and everything else chaos that results from this. And then if you manage to get your act together under whatever support happens, don't think for a minute you're fixed because you are never broken.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. But the problem is they'll think they're fixed and then they'll go experiment with this stuff again because they'll feel like I must be fixed because I'm not feeling any big pull. And the
Mhm.
problem is you don't understand you were never the problem.
Yeah.
And this was been a really useful thing for me over the last couple of years of us talking. This concept, can't be overestimated how important it is.
Yeah.
And yes,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that gives me a chance to talk about where that phrase originated. And I do have a 7-minute video that was the very first video that I made. And I think it starts with that idea I was not broken and I was not. It starts with your quote that
yeah,
I heard after I was thinking in my head, I am not broken, I am not broken, or I will not be fixed. And if when I heard you say that idea that there's nothing psychologically wrong with people. It's the
yes,
food environment that causes the psychological problems. And I'm not quoting you eloquently here,
yeah, no, it's
but
good.
that was the first thing almost the very first thing I heard you say that drew me to you. And I was struggling at that point. It was the end of 2020, and I had been, out of COVID and at this healthy weight. And people were talking to me. This goes back to something I was talking about, the emotional web. People
Yeah,
were talking to me about my weight, and a lot of times they were fishing for what childhood trauma that I had fixed in myself.
yes,
That's what, and I was like, they wanted to know how I had been broken. That
yes,
tremendous curiosity around
yes,
being broken. Like that's conflict, right? That draws people in. People want to know that. And
yes,
like I was not broken. This is about my food. And then they wanted to know how I had fixed myself, like the magical plan. And as soon as I said plants, then like people would kind of like the interest would wane. But but in that moment, I realized that, like I was still feeling very much in the throes of struggle. I
yes,
had triggered anorexic processes at that point.
yes,
I didn't know that. And I was like, I can't figure this thing out. I was still sitting in that space, like, how am I going to live like this? I've lost a lot of weight, but I don't know how to hang on to it, which
yeah,
is really what led me to you. But I was saying the two sides of that phrase to myself to get through social situations. I was not broken. I was not broken. It was self-talk. And then I am not fixed. I am not fixed. And they were very private ways of getting myself through kind of awkward conversations that go with this Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill and encountering some of those same emotional things over and over again, or the emotional journey of weight and weight loss to be able to hang on tight to it. So anyway, so there's a little history for that.
yes,
That might be helpful for people to hear. With this in motion, do you have time to talk about set points?
sure.
Okay. So,
Um, yeah, let's talk about this.
okay.
So, think about calluses on your hand. So, if you don't have any calluses on your hand, and then you start playing golf, uh, and you don't use a glove, and then your hands get bleeding and blisters, and then it kind of goes away, and then as soon as it goes away, you go back and play golf again, and you keep doing that. Sooner or later, you're going to get calluses. And calluses are a natural reaction to the fact that you are basically stimulating that part of the skin over and over again. And the body is smart enough to know that it needs to do something to actually put this thing in an equilibrium. So it's not going to make the calluses twice as thick as they need to be. It's going to make them just the right amount. And if you play more and play more, it's going to get them a little bit thicker. Okay, so it's essentially what you're looking at is a reaction to the biological stresses that you put on the system. And so there's not a set point for the calluses. Okay. If you quit golfing and you quit stimulating that skin, then the calluses are all going to go away. Okay. So it may take a long time to go away, but they're going to go away. And so this is the notion of how it is that biology works. So people are thinking that there are set points. So they think, yes, I was 220 pounds and then I lost 20 pounds. And when I get down to 200, that's where I stay. It's like, that's my set point. It's like, that is not a set point. Because if I reduce the calorie density of your diet by one notch, 4 months from now you're going to be 190, and then you may stay at 190 until I reduce the calorie density of your diet again another notch, and then we'll head to 180, and then we'll head to 170, and then we'll head to 160, and then we'll head to 150, and then we'll head to 140. In other words, there's no set point. The only set point is the stability of your behavior. So the stability of your behavior causes the quote set point in the same way that the callus works. If you play golf twice a week, you'll eventually get the calluses and then they'll be very stable. And you just keep playing twice a week and you stimulate that thing enough. And by God, for the next 25 years, we're going to find out that you got exactly the same calluses. If we took little micro measurements, we'd find that those things weren't 100% stable, but they're super close. And there they sit. And then when you finally retire and you don't play golf anymore, you hurt your back. It turns out, a year later, the calluses are gone. There was no set point. So the only set point there is for humans is a modest amount of fat to be put on the system to cushion your muscles and your cushion your basic structure. It's used as a basically an insulating mechanism for heat and also for trauma to the skeletal system, and also as a storage device for starvation. So there's a certain amount that's put on all kinds of animals, including humans, and that's that. Okay, that is the set point. Okay, so in other words, it should leave your body optimally quick and agile and ability to either run down prey or avoid predators. In other words, it leads you at a place that you would be very close to your athletic optimum. That is precisely how much fat you should have on you. Okay. Anybody that thinks that their set point is leaving them 30 pounds over that, all that means is that your diet has triangulated on a stable pattern where you're probably at 725 calories a pound, but your biology needs you to be at 650. Okay, your diet is slightly overly rich relative to your biology, and so you may have lost 80 pounds, but if you can't lose the last 30, it's not because that's any set point. I guarantee it's not a set point. All I have to do is reduce the calorie density of your diet down 20 or 30 or 40 calories a pound from like 700 to 650. Wouldn't necessarily be a big change, but if I did that, you would lose weight. Now the question is, it's such a subtle change that after you do it for a month, you're like, well, I haven't lost any weight. It's like, yeah, that's because it's really subtle. Okay. You might have lost 9 ounces. And in fact, and you're like, well, that's not anything. It's like, yes, it is. Over the next year, that's going to be 10 pounds. So, and in fact, we don't even know if that will hit the wall at 10 pounds in a year. It might be that change that we make today over the next 27 months will literally, you'll lose 27 pounds and you'll be down right there in optimal ranges. But this is all the little ancillary problems of human beings and their thinking about biology. In principle, they think that if they make a dietary change and that they're going to lose weight, it all ought to be gone in about 6 or 8 weeks, even if it's 80 pounds. Yeah. Like that's kind of how they're thinking. And they can't help it. In other words, they're designed by nature. If we make a change, we should see pretty big effects very, very quickly. So if I go on a diet, by God, I ought to lose 2 or 3 pounds this week at a minimum, right? And the answer is to lose 2 pounds in a week, you would have lost 8,000 calories or about 1,100 calories a day, which would have been a massive crash from how it is that you were previously behaving. So that would be a draconian move on the chessboard, and yet that would be considered slow weight loss in the modern environment. So people are out of touch with this. And so, of course, they think there's mysterious things like set points. But all you're really finding when your weight loss finds a set point is it just means that your behavior has been very stable. So that means that, I've seen many people do that. They've lost, well, I went on the McDougall program, I lost 60 pounds, but then I stopped at 190 and, I'm still 50 pounds overweight, but, it must be a set point. It's like, no, actually, you changed your diet and you kept it very, very similar for 6 months while you lost that 60 pounds, and it's still exactly where it was. And all we're finding now is that your biology, that diet that you're eating, it might be 50 or 100 pounds too rich. And it just means that week by week, your dietary patterns are extremely stable, and therefore your biology has reached an equilibrium.
Mhm.
Okay. I.e., you've got the calluses and you keep playing golf twice a week. Those calluses are going nowhere. Okay. Not until you stop playing golf or start using gloves, and then they'll go away. So that's the story of set points.
Well, and I think there might be one set point that we should probably isolate and talk about further, and that would be like, where is that bottom set point? Because when you're
Mhm.
going through a journey like this, for me, I only had what would the scales tell me, or what would the experts tell me, or what would that, BMI tool on the internet tell me what my final destination should be. And I think that final destination, would be something that I would ask you to talk specifically about too, because there's a lot of uh, emotions that go with this part of the journey too. And even when you're thinking about like what that change to get from 190 to 170, like those are, when we talk about the emotional web, there's a whole emotional web that goes with that too. But and I think that that's clear in what you just said, in thinking about the set point not as a set point but as an equilibrium is very helpful. And then if you could address like what that final weight would be, I think that would be helpful for people.
Yeah. I have a strategy, a general strategy that hopefully this will make sense to people. And that is that what I want them to try to figure out is a diet that they like, that they can come to like, that is very healthy, that doesn't leave them on the edge. We're not trying to have them chronically moderately hungry or trying to be super self-disciplined about how much they eat. I want them to be eating comfortably, routinely over and over again, and eating food that is consistent with our biology, so it's not too rich or too lean, and so that it stays in a comfortable middle ground. And then my attitude is, once we look at that diet and we figure out what it ought to look like, and then we go do it, my attitude is we just sit there very patiently and wait till it stops. What we don't do is we don't aim at 140 pounds. We aim at this diet and then we just find out where it stops. And if it went from 200 pounds and you're a woman that you should be, 140, but it stopped at 158,
Mhm.
like, oh, set point.
Mhm.
Okay. It's like, okay. So we lost, 2 pounds a month for 16 months. So we've lost 32 pounds and now we're at 158. And yet we know damn well we should be at 140.
Mhm.
Okay. In other words, we're pretty sure biologically we can look at ourselves and we can see, I know that when I was, 22 years old, I was 140 pounds. So I really ought to be 140 pounds by any reasonable measure. I might like to want to be 130, but let's be real about what is truly probably biology for me. I'm probably a medium build, 5'7", 140 pounds is a good guess. Okay. So we don't even know if that's true. But what we do know is that we've stopped at 158. Okay. So what we're now going to do is we're going to look at that and we're going to say, what can we do? Because maybe we've looked at that diet and it looks like it's 650 calories a pound. So the next move on the chessboard is we're going to 600. In other words, we're not going to 400. We're not going to turn into a rabbit. We're not trying to rapidly lose this next 18 pounds. We are trying to make a move that we believe is we know it's in the correct direction. But we're trying to make a very small move away from something that where we were very comfortable. We're going to make a very small move and we're going to sit right there for 6 months.
Mhm.
Okay. If 6 months from now we're down 4 pounds, like that might sound like an ice age. But the truth of the matter is, if we do our job, we're only going to have to do this once. So we don't really care how fast it is. And even though people are jumping up and down, like everybody's so in a hurry to get this done. But the truth of the matter is, you want to do it right because once let's suppose that happens and we're down 4 pounds in 6 months. My attitude is, yeah, call me in 6 months and I don't want to hear from you until then because if you call me in 3 months and you're only down 2 pounds, you're all bent out of shape, or you may not even be down 2 pounds. You can't tell. It's like, yeah, you can't tell. Okay, so we're going to keep doing exactly what this is. And now, 6 months from now, you're down 4 pounds. That's outstanding. Okay, now we're down to 154 pounds. We don't know if we're going to lose another 4 pounds in another 6 months. We don't know if we reached equilibrium. Think about like a tank where you have water comes into the tank and then water goes out of the tank. And it's got some little gizmos in between. Our job is to try to get that water level at this level. The water level's up here. We're trying to get it down here. So
Mhm.
the question is, what some people will do is they'll be like, well, we'll shut the water off over here, and not eat it all. Then we'll just let the water drain out and go down. It's like, well, that's one way to do it. Okay, but what are you going to do then? Because the tank will demand water at some point. Longest water fast in history is 386 days. You know, somebody did it.
Wow.
I've had many people went to True North Health Center and fasted 40 days and lost 60 pounds. And it's like, yeah, don't brag to me about that because the problem wasn't really solved by that. You think the problem was solved, but the truth of the matter is the solution is not to shut off the water.
Mhm.
This thing needs an inflow and an outflow, and it needs to be even. And it needs to be even at a place where we need it to be. Okay. So if it's up here, you've reached an equilibrium. That's not a set point. That's just so much that's the water in and the water out is reached here. But we need to then make it a little bit different. But that's all but so I guess my overall thing is when I discuss these things, is people can kind of get from this discussion and they've got from our other discussions the biology is more subtle and more detailed, and it is, in fact, ultimately the solutions, the important understanding needs to take place at the level of this biology. Because if you think that the reason is your quote lack of self-discipline about how much you eat, or your childhood issues, or this or that, it's like, no, you're looking in the wrong place.
Mhm.
You must understand the details about how this works in order to have the perceived self-efficacy, as Dr. Bandura would told us, for you to continue. Okay, you need to understand this. There will be an amazing circus of negative, mostly negative and frustrating emotional baggage and social problems and everything else surrounding this entire thing. Because it's so near and dear to our identity, because it's so incredibly important to us, the the emotional tension and drama around this journey is unbelievable. Okay, it is so great. There is so much smoke around this that everybody thinks that the smoke is the fire. Okay, and I understand that they would think that. It's like, isn't this what the whole problem is? All this smoke, and it's like, no. That's the smoke. And believe me, you can cough on it, choke on it, you can even die from it. But the bottom line is that's not the fundamental cause. The fundamental cause is down here at the fuel and the fire. Okay? You must understand how that thing works if we're ever going to get this thing fixed. And so, yeah, this is as usual, you and I don't plan very well. We just go.
We,
But this is why therapy, of course, part of the therapy is talking about the smoke that you're choking on. It is important, okay? But at the fundamental level, if people are ever going to solve this problem, they need to know how the fire works.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
so you have to be able to move here. And people are so quick to say, no, I'm choking on the smoke. Isn't that the reason why we're having the problem? And the answer is, that is not the reason you're having the problem. They are causing problems. All of those social, psychological processes and internal processes are painful. But the fundamental problem is simply this: you're eating foods that are too calorically rich for your biology.
Yeah.
And the only way we're going to solve the problem is not going to be up here. It must be solved down here.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, trust me, once you understand this, it's exceedingly difficult to do it. And there's all kinds of side, but you must begin here.
Mhm.
Okay. And then everything else follows and is integrated with that. So that's the story, the great story of the set point.
Yeah.
And where are we aiming for? We're aiming at the most gentle, most accurate inflow to outflow. And so that we never got to the low weight by starving yourself or eating lettuce or fasting. That was not the way to do it. The way to do it was the healthiest, most reasonable diet we could think of to gently get us to this place. So that once we're here, we just keep doing what we've been doing for the last year. And lo and behold, we're not gaining any weight and we're not losing any weight. We
Mhm.
found our biological equilibrium.
Mhm.
Okay. We don't aim at it, we discover it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's hard to do in a world swirling around numbers as achievement with
Yeah.
respect to this.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that for me has been really helpful in terms of thinking about set points or equilibriums, maybe even replacing the word set point with equilibrium is going to be a
Yeah.
really helpful strategy for people.
Yeah.
But, I have some sense of what it means to create a higher equilibrium and a lower equilibrium. You learn that in this journey. And
Yes.
and the past 2 years, I've traveled a lot. And sometimes those trips were right on top of each other. And I
Mhm.
was taking my food, I was working hard, I was, doing the trip, and then I was coming back. And I felt like I was, just experiencing, struggle in this journey over and over again. And I was, because with each trip, it is hard to override those instincts. And
Yes.
it takes a level of planning and a level of execution and a level of recovery for me, or getting back in my routine, that I did prioritize, but I still felt like I was boomeranging more than I
Yeah.
wanted to. And what that taught me was how deep the patterns within me are around the pleasure trap. Those shadows are always there. And so part of what happened for me was I created a little bit higher equilibrium, which was wildly successful by most of my life.
Right.
And I was able to stay successful because I raised that equilibrium a little bit by calorie density,
Yeah.
and tried. I still boomeranged more than I wanted,
Yes.
but I wasn't going do, and I wasn't having to start over again, over and over and over and over again. But by what I had been doing in my weight loss journey, it was much wilder than it had been. And so
Yes.
steadiness, I felt like I lost some of that steadiness in all of this travel that I was doing. And so I've been trying to get that steadiness back. But I will say that a strategy around the equilibrium was really helpful for me to just raise it
Mhm.
and keep in mind the big picture of who I was, and maintain this success of enormous weight loss, and not worry about being at the lowest equilibrium I had been. So identifying this range, and
Yes.
now I'm in a new place, really back in a steadiness that is not boomeranging, that I love. And as I am in this state, I just value the steadiness and the rolling hills so much.
Yeah.
It feels so much better, and it is so much easier to maybe make one of those little changes that takes me down again. And explaining that might be helpful for people to know that, like, there might not be that advice to do that out there, but That
Right.
fluidity can help you succeed over time because life can bring turbulence, whatever it is. It might be travel one time, it might be crisis another time, and you have to find a way through that that makes sense for you.
That's actually super interesting. I think you've said something about that before, but I didn't grab a hold of it. And to me, I can remember talking with a client about something similar 5 years ago, and it was her idea, it wasn't mine. And she was very at peace with it. It made sense to her, and it made perfect sense to me. And it went something like this. It went like, well, um, if I hit 150, if I get to there, then that's going to be my high side. And then then I'm going to get more careful. But, I'm not going to get down. Trying to get below 140 was just too hard and was causing an obsession and low calorie density for this individual. And so it's just somewhere, just going to essentially just use those two things as little boundary lines. And just sort of kind of ricochet back and forth, not gently. It's as your rolling hills are, just sort of rolling hills. That I remember her feeling very confident that this was well within her abilities. And so, rather than trying to tightrope act at 142 pounds. You know what I mean? Rather than looking at like, uh-oh, I'm 144 this morning. Uh-oh. In other words, just sort of realizing, wait a minute, there's all this sort of natural fluctuation, and I'm pretty darn close to where, I'm somewhere in the range of my natural history. Yeah, this is also what's super accurate for people to understand is that your body composition is designed by nature to subtly shift around depending upon what the local ecological conditions have been. So when you say, well, I'm 5'4" and I was always 120 pounds, it's like, well, the truth of the matter is, you never were. Okay. Even under ideal conditions, you were 122 for a while when the nuts and avocado and salmon were running, and then you were 118 when none of them were here. In other words, your natural history was always in a moderately fluctuating kind of a situation. And so to kind of respect that it's perfectly fine for us to look at that you can be eating a healthy diet and doing a really good job and even any treats that you're eating are not inconsistent with the fact that in our natural history, our ancestors would go through moments, weeks or days where it was particularly rich, and they would actually store a little bit of extra fat behind that. And realizing that yes, we don't have a singular target where ooh, that's your best place. You know, you might think of it because you look in the mirror one day and you're like, that's it. I'm 125 pounds and I look fantastic. And boy, that's it. It's like, yeah, that isn't it. Okay. The truth of the matter is, it's always a continuum kind of a process. And it's one that if you're somebody that is naturally in great shape at 125, if you're at 135, you're a little bit too heavy. Okay. In other words, how did you get there? Answer some bonbons every night. In other words, there was something that was driving that. And if you get down to 118, what is this about? Are you using fen to try to get super thin for a wedding? Like, what is this? In other words, there's some more natural thing that would be between 120 and 130 that would be completely consistent with our natural history and be incredibly reasonable. And that probably it would be reasonable for you to, if you're in real good shape at 125, it's not bad to set a little marker for yourself at 130.
Mhm.
And the little marker is, okay, well, if I start consistently being around 130, 131, 132 some days, 128, okay, I'm a little too rich.
Mhm.
So now we got to dial the diet back, not in some crash form to try to drive our diet, our weight down to 125, but rather realize that we need to go down a little rolling hill
Mhm.
so that a month from now we're 128.
Mhm.
It looks like it's a 128. Looks like we lost a pound or two this month. It's like good. And now we're back in. You want to sit there for a while, that's fine. But we kind of mark the upper limit
Mhm.
as to what is about time to get our attention to start eating a little more salad. And
Yeah.
that's the notion.
Yep. Yep. And that's I'm experiencing that and knowing the impact of equilibriums. And I would say that failing to maintain an equilibrium taught me about the importance of an equilibrium. And I didn't like how it felt when I failed at an equilibrium. And I also know that if I restrict too much, like
Yes.
both sides of the coin, eat too much and you disrupt a equilibrium,
Yes.
restrict too much and I disrupt an equilibrium. Neither feels good. And
Yes.
kind of thinking about my range, I've determined I've got a range, but I've also determined that, whatever number that an expert recommends, some of those are really low numbers for who
Oh,
I am. And
sure.
in a different life, I might be there, but I live in this modern food environment with maybe a more sedentary job than what I would be doing in the hunting gathering and that sort of thing. And just recognizing that, this is wildly successful. It's not the thinnest I could be, but
Right.
it's clearly not the worst I could be. And I'm not having those ultra processed foods. I'm not struggling with those just wild binges that used to be part of my life, and feeling that steadiness that comes with equilibrium is really good. And there were times I paused. I can name, like in July, I took an equilibrium in 2020 when I lost weight, because July historically had been a weight gain month for me with the heat and humidity of summer. So,
Yeah.
and then taking a pause, I took another pause because there were actually three different major pauses, but one, I was just so tired of thinking about it, and I just decided I needed to figure out, not spend time about what it meant, and just do the same thing over and over again, and not worry about losing weight or gaining weight. And I actually stayed remarkably steady when I got away from the exhaustion of thinking about overeating and undereating. So those
Yeah.
were really instructive. So whatever happens when you feel the difference between an equilibrium and a non-equilibrium can help you self-correct and find your next step in small ways, like you were talking about, Dr. Lisle. So,
Yeah.
but this has been a great conversation, and I think we probably should call it a day because we
Sure.
talked a lot.
Yeah, this is fabulous. All kinds of stuff. I can't even remember all the things we talked about, but I always have a good feeling like I got a bunch of stuff said that I've never said before or said differently. And and your journey is such a fantastic mirror for, because it's been such a big journey and such a big a long story. It's a story that goes back decades and through your entire lifetime. And the and your success is, extremely rare. This is just not something that is seen, but it was also, there's a great phrase, which is success leaves clues. And this wasn't done with Ozempic, and it wasn't done with a surgery, and it wasn't done with amphetamines, and it wasn't also done with fasting and bird food. In other words, this was done very intelligently, steadily. It took its time. It went there, and then along the way, we get to see all of the smoke. Like you corrected the fire,
Yeah.
but then we got to see all of the fallout from it, and then we were able to hear from you the reports of this as it continues. And it's extraordinarily complicated. There's all kinds of dynamics, and it's an unbelievable mess that has been complicated mess made of a very small problem.
Mhm.
I have to, maybe I'll close with this, or you'll have something else that comes up, but I have read accounts by ecologists of, oh yeah, we went into that island and then they had this little problem and we did this, but then that happened. And then as a result of that, then that happened. Then as a result, that happened. Then as a result, that happened. And then we learned we shouldn't have done it in the first place. You know what I mean? It's like a whole chain of unanticipated events that the whole thing winds up messed up. Oh, why? Because we saw something here and we wanted to fix it. And so that reminds me of that what happened when human beings processed food and then made it hyper palatable, etc. then we have this immense chain reaction of everything that happens. And anytime you try to stop some little ancillary thing like, oh, well, let's just do this, or I know what we're going to do. We're going to do diet pill, and that'll knock down my appetite. It's like, you know, this is the problem has to be solved here. It's got to be at the level of the fire and the fuel.
Yeah.
And if you solve it any other place, I mean, I've got some people now that are cheering for their Ozempic and they've had success with it. And it's like, uh-oh, I'm going to get a phone call 6 years from now when the person has gastroparesis and they can't poop and they're feeling suicidal behind it and they can't figure out how to correct it. I mean, I'm just making this up. I just happen to have had a case like that. But the bottom line is that maybe you get away with that trick and maybe you don't. But there is a natural, appropriate way to solve this problem that optimizes your health and optimizes your entire life experience. And is it difficult? Yes. Okay. Is it maybe beyond some people's self-disciplinary reach? Reasonable that that was true. But if anybody's listening to this, it may well not be beyond your reach, and it was not beyond Dr. Lyon's reach. And so this is a great story to analyze because success leaves clues.
Yeah. And success feels so good, and I keep coming back to part of the motivation is living in this sensuality of wellness that I feel because when I am in this equilibrium and eating the foods of my natural history and they're balanced and I feel so much younger than my age. I feel so good in contrast to the way I've felt my whole life. So it's not like the challenge is not without a reward. There is a really great reward, and this can be done. And calling, attention to some of the clues to success, my hope would be that people would just see that, yes, this is natural and you just have to keep at it. And there's no shame in failing now and then. Use it as feedback and learning for the next step, because that's a realistic way to uh, to be successful over time. So
Yeah.
thank you, Dr. Lyle.
My
Always a
great pleasure.
pleasure.
All right. We'll
Right.
cook up another one and always great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.